Welcome to Culinary Conversations presented by Whole Foods Market. I'm Bobby Turner, President of Whole Foods Market South Region. Giving back to our communities is built into our core values at Whole Foods Market. As such, we are proud to be a presenting sponsor of the Decatur Book Festival and the wonderful gift they bring to the cities of Decatur, Atlanta, and beyond. Additionally, at Whole Foods Market, celebrating good food is at the heart of everything we do. So it is my pleasure to introduce the Grand Dames of the South, Nathalie Dupree, Virginia Willis, Belinda Smith-Sullivan. This trio is more than prolific, with more than 20 cookbooks between them. They are also incredibly influential and have helped tell the history and shaped the present state of Southern cuisine. Perhaps tonight we'll even get a glimpse of the future from this visionary group. Here they are now with our moderator, Lagaya Figueres, the food and beverage editor for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's culinary conversation as part of the 15th annual AJC Decatur Book Festival. My name is Lagaya Figueres. I'm the food and dining editor for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And normally we would be doing this on the culinary stage in Decatur Square, but we are thrilled that we can still celebrate terrific food at this year's virtual event. If you have had a long day at work, I'm raising my hand. I know I have, and I'm sure you have too. I hope that this next hour turns out to be the best part of your day. I am honored to be in conversation today with Nathalie Dupree, Belinda Smith-Sullivan, and Virginia Willis. As Whole Foods President Bobby Turner just said, these women are indeed pioneers and visionaries. And I hope that after this hour-long conversation, you come away with a deeper sense of their love and passion for Southern cuisine, where that has come from, where the cuisine has come from, and where it's headed. So a little bit of housekeeping, the plan for this evening, our panel is going to speak for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to leave the last 15 minutes for your questions. To do that, to ask a question, you can just use the Ask a Question feature that's at the bottom of your screen. And you can feel free to type in your question anytime and submit that. Also, before we get started, please consider supporting the Atlanta Journal-Constitution Decatur Book Festival. To donate to the festival, just click on the green button at the bottom of your screen. We make it so easy these days. And finally, we would like to thank Eagle Eye Bookshop, where you can pick up copies of Nathalie, Belinda, and Virginia's books. So thank you, and now we're going to get started. Ladies, it's so great to see you.
You too. Thank you.
Yes, virtual hugs to all of you. Before I even ask my question, tell everybody we're all coming at it from a distance. Virginia, Belinda, and Nathalie, where are each of you coming from? Virginia.
I'm in Atlanta.
Okay, Nathalie.
I'm in Charleston, South Carolina.
Belinda.
I'm in Trenton, South Carolina.
And look what happens. We can still all be together. It's so great. So in this conversation, we're going to talk about the past, present, and future of Southern cuisine. And I think it would be really helpful to those who are tuning in to start with just understanding what planted the seed in each of you to embark on culinary careers. I want to know, where does your love for Southern food come from, food in general? Where does that spark? And when did you realize that you could make a career from it? So Nathalie, since you're the head of the table, I'm going to start with you.
Gee, I think my love of food started when I was young, but I didn't have that much good food when I was young. So it was, it was spotty. I didn't grow up with a good cook like Virginia did. So Virginia's is just endless. But the first meal I remember making fudge. And I remember when my mother added canned mushrooms to spaghetti.
Ooh, so
that was, like fabulous. It was a really good night, but I never had it. It was never as good again. And then when I was, the first time I ever went out to a meal was for our birthday. I mean, other than with my family, was for a birthday. And a friend of ours went, I told my mother I wanted to go to a restaurant that was called Long Chomps. It was a chain French restaurant. And I went there, and the maitre d' just couldn't believe that my friend and I were there. We were maybe 12. And so he recommended things to us. And the first thing he served us was escargot. And I just loved them. I mean, I loved all that garlic. You know, I don't suppose I'd ever had fresh garlic before. I'm sure it was always garlic salt. So then, you know, I got home and I told my mother, I was pretty excited. And she said, I just can't believe you ate snails. Well, I couldn't either, but I decided I
My
liked.
double mom.
She had the nerve to translate. But anyway, yes, I didn't know they were snails.
Virginia, how about you?
Oh gosh, I do. Natalie is correct. My mother is still a wonderful cook. My grandmother was a great cook. My grandfather had a garden, a huge garden. So I just grew up in it. You know, my grandmother would put me on one side of the steel sink shelling peas. I grew up in the kitchen, photographs of me making biscuits at 3 years old. So Southern food has been just a huge part of my real life is for literally as long as I can remember. So in terms of it being something that I realized that I could do as a career, we're gonna, you know, I'm gonna Brady Bunch point down to Natalie. I mean, I started watching her on TV, and it was like, wow, you know, she does that, and so she really, truly, in terms of Southern food specifically, Natalie is the reason that I do what I do today.
Oh, okay, thank you, Belinda. I love the Brady Bunch. Yeah, we can talk. Belinda, tell us about you. What was the spark for you?
Well, I used to spend all of my summers, my brothers and I, in Mississippi on my grandparents' farm. And of course, my grandmother and grandfather grew everything. We didn't eat anything that didn't come out of my grandmother's garden. And even the meats, like the chickens and the hogs and the cows, were even, you know, we ate the ones that were on the farm. One summer we'd go there and they were there, and the next summer we go back and there were different ones there.
Oh,
So we ate everything, you know, that was on the farm, and it was very simple Southern country food. And I was my grandmother's helper, and I'd follow her around the kitchen, handing her this, handing her that. And then the older I got, it's, Grandma, what are you putting in there? And why are you putting that in there? And show me how to do that. And this was all done on a wood burning stove with no running water in the kitchen.
Wow.
And it was just so primitive, but I just loved it. I thought that was just so cool. And of course, like they both say, that was not my career path at that time. I didn't have that in mind. But as I became an adult and moved out on my own and started entertaining friends, that's just something that the love of food and preparing it and feeding people just kind of took over my whole persona and being. And again, I was working in a career in corporate America. And when that career ended, I said, okay, it's time for me to go to culinary school, because this is what I really like to do. And I discovered while I was there, I should have done this 30 years ago because I love it so much.
So I'm going to say one name to you all, and I just want you to tell me what that name means to you. And the name is Edna Lewis. So Natalie, I'm just going to go back to you. Edna Lewis.
oh, well, she was a good friend. And I had many happy hours with her, both at Middleton Place in South Carolina, but most of our time was spent together in New York, or in whenever I went up. We had the same publisher, the same editor, and Judith Jones. And so the assistant editor, and well, actually, Judith really didn't edit me. She edited Edna. She gave my book to her assistant, who had never edited a cookbook before. And Tula and Judith and Tula and Edna and I would go out. We would meet for drinks, and we would go to all sorts of places that I didn't get to go to because I wasn't living in New York. So we would go to the Four Seasons, and we went to 21 and all sorts of places, and places that Edna hadn't been, strangely enough. And So we would go in with Edna, and here she was. She would have on this lovely caftan that she had made herself that was just fit like a dream. And she was so beautiful. Edna was one of the most striking women I know and ever knew. And so everybody's eyes would turn to her, and then the staff would realize immediately who she was. And out would come running the chef, Sergio at the Four Seasons, or at 21, Jerry came running over, and they would come over and they'd see Edna and was so pleased that she would be there. And then they'd wine and dine us. So we had a wonderful time together every time we went to New York for years and years.
Virginia, what does Edna Lewis, when I say that, what immediately brings your head?
Well, I met Edna actually at Nathalie's house in Ansley Park when Nathalie lived there, and I was a 25-year-old little underling apprentice, and so I did not know until later Edna's full history, but obviously her grace and her presence and her largeness of life was present. And then when I started my own small cookbook library and looking at her books and understanding her books, and along with others, but Nathalie introduced me to Edna. And then I guess in terms of Edna, I also knew the work that she did with Scott Peacock, or the work that Scott Peacock did with her. And obviously the Gift of Southern Cooking and Edna's earlier books, I've devoured them all. And I love being French trained myself. I love the finesse in some of the earlier recipes, the blancmange or the souffle or this, that. There's this perception that all Southern food is sort of down home cooking. And there has been fine food and fine cuisine using Southern ingredients for hundreds of years. So that is probably my biggest takeaway from her, that she came from humble origins, and that her family descended from slaves. Yet there has been that fine dining, that sort of that French influence in Southern cooking and early in Edna's career. So that's something that me particularly, of course, because I love those combinations, that's something that's meant a lot to me.
And Belinda, tell us.
French chef.
And again, I'm going to, as Brady Bunch, onto what Virginia said. I never met Edna Lewis. I certainly know of her. And when I think of her, what comes to mind is just such elegance. And I especially like the way she made things just look so easy. She took Southern food, and made it so elegant and beautiful and appealing. And I wouldn't have believed that you could do that before I heard of and started reading her cookbooks.
So my next question is a bit about the evolution, but I'm a person who is still, I feel, very new to the South. I've only been here 5 years. It was 5 years, technically it would be during this Decatur Book Festival, which marks every time the anniversary. And this time around, it's a little bit different, and I'm learning more and more. But I'm wondering about how you all see have seen Southern food evolve as a cuisine, but that's kind of a three-part question. So how you've seen Southern cuisine evolve in its preparation, so the cooking of it, or how the public perceives Southern cuisine to be, and then how it's discussed or portrayed in food media. So I want to start with the first question. And again, we'll just start with you again, Nathalie. How do you think Southern cuisine has evolved in terms of the preparation, the method of preparation, and even the ingredients that are being used in the tradition? I mean, you have 8 decades to talk about here, but from your perspective.
Well, I mean, in fact, we did move from wooden stoves. But even then, we didn't have a lot of equipment in the Southern kitchen. You might beat a fork. I mean, I didn't know anyone that had a whisk. The first whisk I bought was in Chinatown, and it was a round thing. And I was nearly 30, but I had never seen a whisk like you whisk egg whites with. it was a fork that you beat your, or one of those little
Yeah.
things like that, if you were lucky. But so certainly we had rudimental equipment in that sense. But the Cuisinart came out when I had my my restaurant in Social Circle, Georgia, my second restaurant and I think that I've been thinking about it lately. I think really when the Cuisinart came out, I realized that that was a new technique, and that all the techniques I learned in culinary school were applicable, and all the new techniques were applicable to Southern cooking. It was like before that, I was sort of doing everything the old way, except that I did use a whisk to whisk my egg whites with. But even then, I didn't have a KitchenAid. That was before I had a KitchenAid or a rotary electric whisk.
Mm-hmm.
We beat all of the eggs for my restaurant by hand with a copper bowl. And so with a whisk, which was a step up, and we were lucky. So it was when I was in that restaurant in Social Circle in the early 70s that I began to use other techniques with Southern ingredients. And I used to use other foods with Southern techniques, like zucchini. Zucchini was brand new to the South, or at least to Social Circle when I moved there. And you couldn't get shallots, for instance. They didn't sell shallots. You didn't get shallot or shallots. Yeah, there were a lot of things that were new, and even mushrooms. Mushrooms had just started being shipped down to Georgia from Kennett Square. That was the only place that was growing them and selling them until a man moved in Madison, Georgia, and started growing mushrooms. So then all of a sudden, everybody locally began using the mushrooms, both the ones that they bought from Kennett Square, which were just white mushrooms, button mushrooms, but then he had opens that we now, are now fancier ones. But so then I would use mushrooms in some of the Southern restaurants that I had only used canned mushrooms in before, because we didn't see a fresh mushroom when I was growing up. Maybe someone knew how to pick them. And actually later I found wild mushrooms in near where I lived in my friend Margie's woods, but before that, not. So then used Southern, the flavors that I had from the South, and used those new ingredients in the same way. So I did like a zucchini and squash casserole, or a zucchini casserole the same way, or zucchini and corn.
Virginia, how about for you?
So I think it's really interesting just listening to Nathalie say what she said about, there were no mushrooms. And I think that one thing that's happened with all food, all American food, and also has happened with Southern food, is that many of these ingredients did exist, and then we sort of lost sight of them, right? And I think that our mutual friend, David Shields, talks about the heritage ingredients, the heirloom ingredients. And then, so of course there were wild mushrooms or chanterelles and all sorts of deliciousness that we think of very gourmet now, but they're in the woods in Appalachia. They're in the woods right by the Chattahoochee. They always did exist. We just lost sight of them, I think. And so then what happened was convenience foods took over. So much, I think, changed with World War II, not only due to austerity, but also in the tremendous changes that happened with farming and the use of moving away from the farm as like a cornerstone of society. Everyone moved to the cities, not because they wanted to move to the cities, the work left, right? Fertilizer became more prevalent. Like the agrarian community changed, ingredients disappeared. It changed from being about a delicious homegrown tomato to how many tomatoes could be produced from that acre and how far could they be held, how long could they be held, and how far could they be shipped. And so in terms of like Southern ingredients, I think that what started happening in the 70s and the 80s and then onward is that those ingredients like, whoa, look, they started coming back. And I think that what has happened is that sort of farm to table movement that is the standard operating procedure for the most part now, is what shined a light on some of those ingredients and brought them back. And so now we're in touch with the tomatoes that my grandparents used to have, or the squash that my grandparents used to have, or the winter squash, or, things like that. So I think if anything, what's happened is that it's come more full circle, and we're understanding the importance of food tasting like it tastes like something, and having the terroir, if you want to use the French term.
Belinda, I'll let you jump in here and tell me what you think about the evolution of Southern cuisine when it comes to the preparation or the ingredients, the method.
Well, I believe it has come full circle. I remember when we were younger and the way my mother and my grandmother would prepare foods. For instance, I'm going to use something because I was just looking for it in the supermarket, using lard. Everything was fried with lard. Then lard went away for it seemed like a long, long time. Now lard is back. I was in the supermarket and the whole bottom shelf was full of all different types of lard. So I think that as Virginia and Nathalie both said, for a while we got away from cooking Southern foods in the traditional way. Some ingredients even disappeared, but now they're coming back and people are wanting again to cook in with the authenticness of the ingredients that were used before. Another thing, someone asked me at the salon just yesterday, where can I get fat back? I'm like, I have no idea, but it's back and people are wanting to use it again.
Oh my God, I love fat back.
Yeah.
It's so interesting just to say it's back. I think that as somebody who covers, just the food scene and I'm looking at a localized lens here in Atlanta, a statewide lens, a regional lens, and then you go nationally and internationally, take a look around. There has been, I want to say that it really has been in the last 7 years, such eyes on Southern cuisine. But I think that perception of what Southern cuisine is varies from region to region. What do you think the perception, and what do you think the perception of Southern cuisine is right now? And how do you think that might have changed? Any of you can take it, whoever wants to take it.
We have been doing very well for some time now, but I do think that that a lot of other cuisines are entering. Olin Getty certainly entered a lot of brought in a new cuisine with the Israeli cuisine, but a lot of the ingredients and a lot of the emphasis and seasonings are prepared products. And so although the overall look of some of these exotic cuisines, Chinese or Vietnamese or Israeli, appears to be fresh, nonetheless, there's a vast number of store-bought condiments that are being used as opposed to homemade condiments. And that is making it easier for people to use those cuisines. I'll throw that out. I know that Virginia is going to challenge that, but
You know me well.
yeah, pretty well. But I just think if you think about it, all of the ones, I don't know how many people make their own harissa, which I used to do, but I see people now buying harissa all of the time, rather than making it themselves. That would be an off the top example. And soy sauce is a product that comes in a jar. So if you use that to season everything, and if you use sesame seed oil to season everything, then you're not really using a lot of totally fresh ingredients, are you?
Well, I'm going to now jump on that. Since you said soy sauce, just recently for the AJC, I wrote a piece on Filipino cuisine, and the sources for those recipes was here in Atlanta. So these are Filipino Americans. And I think my question is going to be posited this way. Atlanta and Georgia are certainly places where we see a diverse group of people. And so when it comes to evolution, cuisine is evolving. Is it even fair to say that there is just something overarching called Southern cuisine anymore? Or can we talk about that, how broadly it's expanding to where people who are culinarians down here are bringing in the context from their own upbringings, their heritages, and then also seeing the foodways that the foods that they have around them, applying knowledge of cooking styles and ingredients from their past, and merging those together in something that's brand new.
Well, it's not really brand new. Virginia was the first one to write a cookbook that merged those two cuisines when she came back from France, and she did Bon Appetit, y'all, and that it was in her mind from early days. So everyone else is just kind of doing what Virginia did, what people did before there was just a movement towards Southern food. But we've always been an amalgam. Over to Virginia.
That's it. And that's it, like you've done this story, but the South, I mean, I did write about it actually more recently in my last cookbook, Secrets of the Southern Table. The South, what is Southern cuisine? Well, coastal cuisine is different from mountain cuisine. Both Belinda and Nathalie are in Charleston. The cuisine of Trenton is different than the cuisine of Charleston, which is also different than the cuisine of Atlanta, which is different from the cuisine of Nashville or Memphis, right? So the South in of itself is approximately 1/4 of the United States. And there are many regions and micro regions. So the bread of my people, I always joke, is a biscuit. Well, someone else's bread of their people might be cornbread. And now the bread of someone else's, it may be lumpia or something like that, right? It's like I sort of bristle at the fact that Southern food is only, by definition, okra and collard greens and biscuits and cornbread. And now, oh gosh, we get to have heirloom Carolina gold rice. No, I mean, what about all the people that have moved here and migrated here? We have two coasts, and there's this great gumbo that has happened for centuries, not just recently, for centuries. Other cultures have influenced what Southern cuisine is.
I'm going to move on a little bit, because one common thread among the three of you is home cooking. I mean, that's key to thinking, to me at least, and what I think about you and some of the lasting contributions that you have given to all of us, is this tome of cookbook after cookbook. And I want to hear a little bit about how you geared your attention to home cooks and to helping those people in their home kitchen to explore food as you love it and as you want us to experiment in the kitchen. Can you talk with me about how you honed in on home cooking?
Make Belinda say something.
Yeah, Belinda, you go first. You're the one with the most recently published cookbook.
Yeah, you've got one coming out this month. Is it out?
It's out.
We have to do this. This is Belinda.
Yeah, I was gonna say I gotta get my coffee.
Oh,
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's brunch.
I just wanted to say my first book was a book called Just Peachy. Now, my family is from Mississippi, and specifically from the Mississippi Delta. When Virginia talks about the diversity of all the different Southern types of food, mine's from the Mississippi Delta, and it's a very specific kind of food, almost like that of Appalachia. You know, they have their own way of doing things. But I moved here to South Carolina, and the food here was different for me. Well, I wrote this book called Just Peachy, and everyone, well, South Carolina is known for its peaches. Sorry, Virginia. South Carolina is known for its peaches. And I wrote this cookbook, 75 recipes of not just desserts, but I touched on breads, I touched on entrees, and salads, and I just kind of really diversified peaches into all these different menu and dish types. And even people right here who live in the county where I live, Edgefield County, were shocked that there were so many different things that you could do with peaches other than eat them or make a peach cobbler. So.
True. It's true. There are a lot of wonderful recipes. But, you know, I had people that came by recently, Belinda, and they wanted us to go out to eat breakfast with them, and I just wasn't ready to go to a restaurant. So I said, no, can't you eat here? And then it turned out she was allergic to onions and something else. And so I was caught a little back, you know, from what I had already in the freezer, or that I already had ready. I couldn't regroup fast enough. Brunch is hard. How on earth did you come up with all those brunch recipes?
Brunch has been my favorite way of entertaining, again, since my college days.
Well, you look like it in the morning.
Say that again, Nathalie?
In the morning, like when we were on that Zoom call this morning, you didn't look like you were ready to fix brunch for anybody.
He's throwing shade. Nathalie Dupree is throwing shade on Zoom.
Let's not talk about that.
I'm sorry.
Witnessing it.
Yeah,
No,
we had
that's
an
okay.
8:30 in the morning meeting, and we were both like, oh God. So anyway, I'm sorry. But how do you get yourself together to do brunch?
Wow. Again, I call it entertaining light. It's the easiest meal you can make. I love giving dinner parties, but I'm so totally stressed that I can't even enjoy them. Brunch, I love entertaining for brunch or with brunch, because then you can be a guest at your own party. I mean, the dishes are so simplistic to make, and you can make a lot of them ahead of time. I mean, you know that, but I love brunch. And it's something that a lot of people say, wow, I never thought of inviting people to my home for brunch. And I'm amazed that no one has ever thought of it. So
I'm gonna switch again because I know that an hour goes by so quickly. But at this moment, our country is having more conversations about systemic racism and inequality. And when it comes to food media, I'm curious to know what you all think needs to happen within food media to be more inclusive and diverse. Linda, I'm going to ask to start with you, but I also think that as I sit here and I see three women in front of me who have taken monumental footsteps, I think that that's fair to bring in, you know, gender as well. So can you talk with me about what you think needs to happen going forward so that all voices can be heard when it comes to stories of food? Go ahead, Belinda.
what I'm thinking is, when it comes to, well, let's talk about African-American chefs and their restaurants. Most of the time you will find them in the African-American communities, because that's where we have sort of that food desert, or that lack of venues for people who live in those areas to visit. If people would just support those restaurants by visiting them. A lot of times they don't want to go into certain neighborhoods because they think they're not safe. Even though they may want to try a restaurant, they won't go there. If you take the leap of faith and visit those areas and visit those chefs' restaurant, then it gives visibility to those chefs and the restaurants and the type of food and message that they're trying to give about themselves and the food.
Virginia, do you want to weigh in on this?
I would agree with that. And I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about just previously about, like, what is Southern food? So you know, there's this sort of perception of down home cooking and African American cooking, and there's a long history of, like, you know, really simple ingredients and a cuisine born of poverty. You know, chitlins and low on the hog, not high on the hog. But hey, y'all, we're in 2020, for better or for worse. There's a lot of, you know, Atlanta, world's largest airport. This is a multicultural, multi-international community. And chefs and culinarians and home cooks are getting the benefit of that. And it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. You know, there's a tremendous Indian American population in Decatur. One of the fastest growing areas in Atlanta in terms of diversity is the Korean American population. Koreans are moving from LA and from New York for the quality of life here in Atlanta. And where I'm going with that is it doesn't just, these are restaurants. This is like not just like your quote unquote ethnic restaurant, right? It's just about supporting good food, good restaurants, people that are doing good work. And conversely, you know, people that look like me, or the men that look like me, they're getting inspiration from those restaurants. So, you know, I feel like the culinary community, by and large, although that's a big, broad statement, I think the culinary community, the people that are actually doing the work in the kitchens, are excited and interested to learn from other people. And what we have to do is do what Belinda said, and the guests, the clients have to support those restaurants.
Yeah, and we need to see what people are actually doing. I remember Billy McKinnon, who had a Louisiana a cook restaurant there, McKinnon's Louisiana, I think it was called. But he had people, I think they were from Thailand, that cooked for him. And so he learned Thai cooking, and he started incorporating it into his Louisiana cooking, and into what, if you went to Billy's house, you'd get Thai food. You wouldn't necessarily get the Cajun food that he cooked at the restaurant. So we have to look and see what is in the kitchens.
Who's in the kitchen? Who's in the kitchen actually cooking? You know, who's
really cooking?
Who's really doing the cooking?
And that is something that's always been an issue for me, because we were brought up, all three of us, I know this is true, that if someone gave you a recipe or someone taught you something, it was just second nature to say, what we're doing right now, Virginia taught me this, or Belinda taught me that. And we have always exchanged information, but we've also pretty well remembered who told us and shared it. And I do find that I am sexist about this, that men frequently, shocking, frequently don't credit the people that are working for them, and don't, so that changes the food without them being credited. And those people are frequently immigrants, women, so forth. I'm sure that people are going to jump all over me for that, the male ones. But
that kind of almost, that jumps right into my next question that I had for Virginia, because I was thinking about her approach when it comes to cookbook writing. For example, Virginia, I'm going to do this for you, but this latest book, this is a different approach to writing your cookbook than your Y'all series. Yep. And that is, you went out and you spoke to producers and farmers. And I will say, as somebody who reads many cookbooks across a variety of genres, we're seeing more of this type of storytelling now, whatever the cuisine is, that you're getting, that this cookbook writer is getting closer to the source and saying, this is not just an okra, or this is not just, gumbo herbs. Here is where this is coming from. And I went and visited this person, and this is the story from this farm. Just you and I the other day were in a conversation with Casey Cox, a peanut farmer, and listening to a person who's producing peanuts. And more than ever, I think that the three of you, for example, as cookbook authors, there's a place there for you to bring your readers closer to the source of potentially their food. Can you talk a little bit about that approach? Because it was different than the other cookbooks you wrote.
Thank you. Well, that book, I'll tell you where it came from. So Secrets of the Southern Table, I was in, thank you. I was in Houston. So that book came out in 2018, which means I turned it in 2017, which means I wrote it in 2016, right? So you back into it. So I was in, it was like 2016 or 15, I guess. And I was in Houston, Texas, which is one of the largest cities in the United States. And there's a lot of, opinion about whether Houston, Texas is the South or not. But I would consider definitely East Texas more the South than West Texas. But I was in Houston, I was in this cavernous Vietnamese restaurant. And I was looking around, and the South it's popular food, but it's always like there's this perception. People hear people that talk like me, and they assume that I don't have a friend that is the color of Belinda, right? They assume that I'm maybe redneck, or they assume that I'm uneducated, or they assume that I am racist. There are all these assumptions about Southerners, and it goes on the Black side as well, right? Or on the Indian side or the Korean side. There's these assumptions about Southerners. And so I was in this restaurant in Houston, and I'm eating sort of what like the Louisiana influence. We were eating Vietnamese Cajun crawfish. So what they do is they took the Cajun crawfish boil, and then they add these Vietnamese ingredients, and like lemon and ginger and lemongrass and all these like Thai chili peppers, and it's just delicious. And I'm sitting in this restaurant with butter rolling down my arms and enjoying this food and looking around. And over there is a table of Mexican Americans, and there's a birthday party. And over there, it was a Sunday. And over there is in the afternoon, and there was a group of African-American ladies, all in their white hats, the whole thing. And then there's a bunch of cowboys. And so it was kind of like the UN. And I remember, and this is where the idea from that book came from, I'm sitting in that restaurant, butter rolling down and I'm like, this is the South. This is the modern South. This is my South. Right? Where everyone is enjoying this one particular food. So that's where that idea from that book came from. And it's so much more interesting than just like saying that all we do is eat overcooked greens with fatback Bobby in it. I do love that, right? But we are more than that. So I think that those stories, education comes when people learn the story and they look past the stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to shift in just a minute here to some questions. And Virginia, you kind of just answered the one I did want to ask everybody. And that is, every recipe has a story. In fact, to me, it's like when I read cookbooks, one of the most exciting parts is reading the intro blurb, right? That graph. I want to know the story behind it. So for you, Belinda, and for you, Nathalie, can you just give us a quick story about a really favorite recipe, a Southern recipe with a story that's so meaningful to each of you? Whoever wants to go first. Yeah, go.
I'll go.
Okay.
In my peach cookbook, I have a peach coconut cake. And it's not everyone always asks, what's your favorite recipe? Well, recipes are like children. You don't have a favorite. But my sentimental favorite is that peach coconut cake. And here's why. Coconut cake was my mother's favorite. She only made it once a year, and that was on her birthday. So when my mother passed away, I put that recipe in the book. And I said, when my mother passed away, I said, every year on her birthday, I'm going to make this cake. Well, every year I'd pull out all of the ingredients, and then I would get very emotional and I couldn't make the cake.
Oh, baby.
So I have to put all the ingredients away, and I tried the next year, and this went on and on and on until Just Peachy came out. And a friend of mine said to me on Mother's Day, would you make something for me? And I said, what do you want me to make? She says, I want that coconut cake. Now she knew this story.
Oh, you're making me cry.
So I made this cake for her. And it was the first time I didn't cry, because I wasn't making it for Mama. I was making it for someone else, so I was able to detach myself from it. So that's my story.
Oh, that's so beautiful. All right, Natalie, your turn.
That's not fair. She set us up to cry. Now we're going to cry. Well, I did want to go back to what we were saying with about ingredients, and then I'll move very quickly onto this. But when we did, Cynthia Stevens and I'm my co-author of Mastering the Art of Southern Cooking and Southern Biscuits, and helped me with favorite recipes, stories, and recipes. My last one. Cynthia and I traveled to 85, I think it was, different Southern venues and farms and did 2-minute videos on them. But at the time, it wasn't easy to go find Vietnamese shrimpers, for instance. And I don't want to say they weren't necessarily there. It just wasn't the same to find them. There was some of that, but not to the degree that Virginia did. So it's a different body of information, but it was more Southerners still farming at the time. And so I think that's when I realized, when we would call, how many important Southern ingredients there were, how many Georgia ingredients. The agriculture commissioner of Georgia loaned us his plane to fly all over Georgia and go to farms. And I realized how wonderful. Have you ever been to Cordele, Georgia, and had their melons? Those are the best melons in the world. And they called themselves the melon capital, but they weren't shipping them as far as they were. There was no system of distribution from Georgia at the time. And so that has impacted Southern ingredients and the awareness of the fact that we have this wonderful growing season and this wonderful climate and with a little help from fertilizer, a good soil. but anyway, it is a continuation of the fact that the South contributes a great deal to the agricultural South. In terms of recipes, I guess I have to go back to Kate. That is always my story. Kate was a wonderful woman who was working in the mill in Covington when the mill closed. And so she started work, someone told her about me, and she came working for me as a dishwasher at night. And then she started cooking our meals at lunch, the lunch meals, because that usually falls to whoever's free. And my God, she would make us biscuits. And those were the best biscuits I've ever had, and still are. I have learned how to make Kate's biscuits, and it's in my biscuit book, and it's in Mastering.
And this is the latest one.
And then I have a story about Kate in the latest book, because Kate's granddaughter said to her mother, she said, "Mother, what are we going to do when Granny Kate dies, for biscuits?" And they were all trying so hard to make Kate's biscuits. And it was so hard to, I think I finally got it down. I won't say mine are as good as Kate's, but I do think the recipe is if you practice that recipe, then you could make it the way that Kate did. But it's not natural to cook something without thinking about somebody or something that ties into it.
It's also sometimes the joy and the reason for doing it, right? Every time I make banana bread, I'm going to use my mom's recipe, and that's like a little bit of a spark.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I never make a biscuit without thinking about Cynthia and Kate and all of them.
Mhm.
But I also want to say that in my family, my husband's family, we have a Vietnamese daughter-in-law. We had the Chinese daughter-in-law. We have my husband's sisters have African-American grandchildren. So we are a hodgepodge family. And so whenever I write something, it's about the hodgepodge of our, it has a different component each time. We don't stand alone. And I think that's all part of Southern food is how interrelated we are. And let's face it, from the get-go, whether it was, Native Americans who were here first, or when African Americans or Caribbean Americans came to this country first, there was always shared heritage. Did I put that politely? But there was always mixed heritage. And you see it all the way through. So when we talk about what's important about bringing out, I'm hoping that we can get to the point that we can claim this mixed heritage. I'm hoping that we can understand that there are so many people that are not just one ethnic group, like I'm not. I'm Danish and German, and the Danes and the Germans don't really even like each other from the areas where mine are from. So anyway, that is answering your question.
Thank you.
All of the stories in here, though, are about stories about food.
You're all wonderful. You're a wonderful storyteller, and thank you for the stories that you've been sharing tonight. I'm going to shift over because we now have some questions from our audience. We should wave to them, guys. Hello, hello.
I can't see them.
Tonight. Yay!
Yay.
Zooming. Thanks for zooming with us.
Can you see anybody, Virginia?
I cannot. I see you, and I see the Brady Bunch of us.
Yeah.
Virginia, the first question, someone says that this person knows that Virginia traveled to Sicily as well for one of her books. How did she choose the places to visit, and how does she choose particular recipes to bring back?
So when I went to Sicily, wow, someone really read that. When I went to Sicily, actually, it was an earlier part of my career after I left Nathalie and went and lived and worked in France for a bit. I came back, lived in New York, and I was working for Epicurious. So Epicurious really was a sort of a very eye-opening piece for me, because we were able to, it was a television series on the Discovery Channel, and we traveled the world exploring food stories. So I was able to go to Sicily and had, I ate fresh caught anchovies straight off the dock that had marinated in lemon juice and olive oil all night. And getting to do that at 4:30 in the morning with this, Sicilian fisherman was, I'll never forget that, right? So that glamour and that thing that, oh, I had such and such at a blah, blah in France or Paris or Spain or Sicily or whatever. Yeah, we have that quality food right here. We really do. And we've got those beautiful memories that can be made right here. So in terms of choosing recipes that I put in my book, the number one thing is it's just got to taste good. And it has to come from someone that I like or a nice person. And but mainly, and it's got to have a good story. So my books are highly, highly personal, and so those are my three criteria.
And the next one then is for Belinda. So this is on the art of entertaining. This person wants to know your trick for getting everything to be hot at the same time during brunch.
Wow. It's planning the menu so that you don't have a whole bunch of things that need to come together at the same time. It's just that simple. Again, I believe that you make as much as ahead of time as you can. And I love hearing Nathalie's Thanksgiving story on what to do with turkeys and how many to make, but do as much as you can ahead of time. Design the menu again, so that you don't have 5 or 10 things that need to be put on the table hot at the same time. It all comes down to planning.
Another question that we have, and I'll just add a follow-up to it. This person asks, is Carolina gold rice worth the price tag? And I think the follow-up question is to posit it within the larger context of heirloom ingredients, or what we might call these days artisanal ingredients. Are those worth the price tag? Who wants to take that question?
Well, I'll take that because Carolina Gold and Charleston Gold are really exceptional rices. And my grandson, my husband's grandson, is, as I said, part Chinese, and he's got an enormous relationship with rice of all sorts. And he came to my house and I served Carolina Gold, and he was like knocked out. So I hadn't thought about his rice familiarity when I served it. That's just what I had, because I never really know for sure when they're coming. And all of a sudden they were all there, and I had Carolina Gold rice, and that's what we did. So he could tell immediately. So that's my answer. Carolina Gold rice has a phenomenal taste.
Well,
But I can't afford it every day.
I think I'd like to jump into Will Harris, White Oak Pastures farmer, South Georgia. You know, he has this, he's like, if food is cheap, it's being paid for somewhere else, right? So
Wow.
somehow it's being subsidized somewhere, whether it's in human life, right, and the quality of life of the workers. You're not just paying $9.99 a pound for that rice. You're paying for the heritage and the ingredient and the history of that rice, but you're also paying for it to be farmed in a sustainable manner. You're paying for it to be harvested by people who are being paid a living wage. You know, we Americans spend less per capita on food than almost any country. We are so used to commodity foods that have been subsidized, and those awful tomatoes that I was talking about before. So when you're paying for that rice, you're not just paying for the rice, you're paying for the quality of life of people and the quality of life of the planet.
So
They aren't growing it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
we're going to close it out with each of you answering a question. Someone has a question that is, what's your favorite Southern food to eat? And since there are so many, I'm gonna just like zone it in. What is your favorite Southern food to eat during the pandemic? Belinda, you go first.
I'm embarrassed now. Every Sunday, I make collard greens and ham hocks for myself. That seems to
You lucky.
That's my favorite to eat every
Cornbread or
Sunday.
biscuits
Cornbread and biscuits. And Virginia, you?
with them.
Okra.
Okra. My okra right now is like 10 feet tall. Natalie, when you were talking about the beauty of this region and it's growing, it's insane. I've never seen anything like it. So ladies, I think we are out of time, and I just want to say thank you very much to all three of you.
Thank you. Thank you for leading.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody who joined in to tune in tonight. Our next session in this culinary track for the AJC Decatur Book Festival is Friday, September 18th at 6:30 Eastern. Houston chef Chris Williams is going to be chatting with Atlanta-based food journalist Mike Jordan. They're going to be talking about the impact of Black and enslaved chefs on American cooking. And you can find the entire schedule and register for these virtual talks at DecaturBookFestival.com. So thank you everyone again for joining us. Stay safe, wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands, and we'll see you at next year's festival.
Thank you. Bon appetit,
Thank
y'all.
you. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, Belinda.
Bye, Natalie. Bye.